Hello and welcome to the Farming Today podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode... Good morning. Today, farmer protests about last year's budget as this year's is delivered.
I'm very much hoping there's going to be a change, something today, whether there's going to be a goalpost has changed, whether we're allowed to slip through the net and they tax the people that should really be paying.
We're hoping that the government are going to listen before it's too late, before they wipe us out.
Farmers were in London again yesterday to protest about the re-imposition of inheritance tax on farming and business assets of more than £1 million, something announced in last year's budget. Many of them had been planning to take part in a tractor protest, but less than 24 hours before it was due to start, the Metropolitan Police told the organisers that no agricultural vehicles could be brought to the event. That caused both anger and confusion, and hundreds of tractors did arrive in London. One of the protest organisers, farmer Colin Rayner, told me the police's decision was a total surprise and wrong.
We had it all planned, all organised, agreed with the Metropolitan Police. The committee had a meeting with the police on Zoom at 3 p.m. yesterday afternoon and cancelled it and said we couldn't park in Whitehall, and if we parked in Whitehall we'd be arrested and carted off to jail.
To be fair, the Met Police will point out they didn't stop the protest. They just said please don't bring tractors because of the impact it has on emergency services and Londoners going about their day.
I have to beg to differ because they have protests in London every weekend by various...
Not with tractors.
But we came here last time and the Metropolitan Police said there was the best protests that they've ever seen, best well behaved, and the farmers even cleaned up after themselves. And what we've got today is chaos.
There are lots of tractors around Trafalgar Square. I've just walked down. We've got reports of some people being arrested because they won't move their tractors. But it was clear that tractors couldn't be brought this time.
It's quite clear that you couldn't park in Whitehall. And our original plan was to drive up here, do a circuit of Westminster and go home. But when we got here, the police parked us up on Trafalgar Square and told us to go and walk to the Mall for the protests.
Why were you protesting in the first place? Because we had Angela Eagle on Farming Today last week and she said she understands people's anger, but we are where we are, time to move on.
Our family have farmed for a very long time. We can't lose it.
But you won't. You have plenty of time. 7 years you've got to gift that to your offspring.
Unfortunately, if you make that 7 years, and I've dealt with my parents' deaths and the tax we had to pay then, and that was crippling. And when my grandparents died in the 60s, my parents were poor for 20 years, paying the death duties and selling houses and selling property. And we went without in the 60s and 70s. I don't want my children to suffer that.
But they won't. If you get yourself organised, you've got 7 years to gift bits away to get under the threshold, so you won't be affected by this at all.
That's on the thing that I can live 7 years and whether my children want to take it on. It's not only the inheritance tax, it's every other tax. They don't want us to farm, and for some reason we're not liked by this government.
The government would deny that, obviously, and they will say this is a fair tax, and a lot of people in today's budget will no doubt be affected by paying more tax in one way or another. Why should a farmer be any different?
We wouldn't object so much if the tax was spent wisely. When we see billions of pounds going overseas...
But that's a completely different argument, isn't it, about how tax is spent?
No.
You are, by any stretch of anyone's imagination, sitting on millions of pounds worth of land in many cases on farms. So why shouldn't you pay tax?
Well, it would mean the split up of our farm, unfortunately. And then it would become uneconomic. And the tax burden for the next generation would be too great. If you see who is protesting today, it's mainly under 30-year-old boys and girls who are up here worried about their future. And we've looked after the country, all of us, for hundreds of years and done a really good job. And I just think the government needs to rethink and give us time. And there's other ways. The NFU have come up with other ways they can tax us, which are fair. I don't think it's fair.
Colin Rayner. The Metropolitan Police refused our request for an interview, but in a statement said, This decision was taken due to the serious disruption they, tractors, may cause to the local area, including businesses, emergency services and Londoners going about their day. They said that those in tractors were advised to leave and that the majority listened to officers and complied, but that several arrests were made. Well, protesting farmers on foot were guided to an area opposite the gates to Downing Street, where a few hundred gathered and listened to the Chancellor. There was just one mention of inheritance tax in Rachel Reeves' speech.
I reformed inheritance tax on agricultural and business assets. And this year, I am aligning those reforms with wider inheritance tax rules by allowing the transfer of the 100% relief allowance between spouses, balancing the taxation of these valuable assets with the realities of family life.
That didn't impress those listening farmers or the leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
She should be on the side of people who get up and go to work, people who take a risk to start a company, people working all hours to keep their business afloat. She should be on the side of the farmer, trying to hand something over to the next generation.
Kemi Badenoch. So, what did nature and farming groups make of it? Sean Spears is a former Labour MEP and now Executive Director of the Green Alliance think tank.
I think from a climate point of view, it was very positive because there's been lots of attacks on climate policy. We know the Conservatives and Reform are campaigning against the decarbonisation and the Climate Change Act. We know that high bills are the reason that the public public support for climate action is slightly softening. That's been, I think, incorrectly blamed on climate policies and on net zero. And the government have moved to address that. They brought down bills and they've redoubled their commitment to saying we need to tackle climate action. And that should be good news for farmers because we know the effect that flooding and drought and everything else has on farming and on food prices. So it's a little bit tangential to the main kind of concern of farmers, I know, and the reason they brought their tractors into London for the budget. But I think it's really important.
There was talk of energy infrastructure and things like that, but there was nothing sort of directly for nature, was there?
There wasn't. I think the big story was in the spending review, and the spending review did guarantee the farming budget, which is really important. There are other areas where we need to lever more money into support for nature. I think reform of water policy is the really big one because we know water companies have got £100 billion, more than £100 billion to spend over the next 5 years. A lot of that could go to support farmers and nature-friendly flood protection policies and so on. But I wasn't really expecting a whole lot of detail in this budget on those issues. I think the spending review, regulation, other things are what's going to bring the benefits.
Farmers, of course, will say they can't be doing good things for nature if they're not there. And they will claim that some of the policies that this government is pursuing are making their life very difficult.
Indeed, and I think a little bit of love for farmers from the Chancellor wouldn't have gone amiss. You probably don't hear many budget speeches that major on farming policy, but given how badly relations with farmers got off after the inheritance tax changes in the Chancellor's sort of first weeks, given the terrible impacts of climate change, given the stop-start on the farming support policy, I think a little bit of acknowledging that farmers are feeling the pain would have been in order, even though, as I say, I wouldn't really expect concrete measures in this budget, though there was a small change to the treatment of inheritance tax, which has been welcomed in a small way also by the NFU.
Sean Spears from the Green Alliance. And outside the gates to Downing Street, protesting farmers had hoped for a lot more from the Chancellor.
Given the huge discrepancy between the capital value of property and its productive value, whether it's you or you and your spouse or you and anybody else, you can't pay it. It is not possible to pay your way out of this.
That's a small back down, really, but it's still nowhere near enough, not for the amount of money. With the seasons and the way the harvests are at the moment and our returns, there's just no way we can run to it. So it's tinkering. She needs to up the limit if she's going to do anything.
Have you been following the budget as you stand here outside Downing Street?
Well, so far I haven't had anything agricultural related, which is a real shame given how much support there is here from the rural community. And as a younger farmer in my 30s with children that I was hoping to pass the farm down to, and I know a U-turn was probably exceptionally unlikely, but we were still hoping for some sort of change on at least ring-fencing the older generation that haven't had time to plan for this inheritance tax. The government not bending any of the policy at all is disgusting.
Well, the president of the National Farmers Union, Tom Bradshaw, told me the budget was disappointing.
Well, look, obviously there's been a small amendment within today's budget on the inheritance tax proposals, which means that the spousal allowance can be transferred, and that is backdated to enable those that have already lost a spouse to make use of that spousal allowance. So they will be eligible for up to £2 million once you bring in that allowance. But it's a really, really small change, Charlotte. It does not remove the human pressure, which is so intolerable for that older element of our community and those that are terminally ill. It's still an evil policy which has them trapped with no way to plan, and we will continue to fight the policy.
Well, surely what this does in practice is raise the threshold for people who have a spouse, because it allows you to transfer that allowance.
No, because if your spouse was alive, then you already had, between you both had the £1 million allowance. So what it's meant is that in the tragic circumstances of an early death, where your children may not be old enough to inherit, you don't have to pass that down to the next generation at an inappropriate stage. So it makes it far more possible to plan when it is right to pass that down. There was an element here for those that had already lost a spouse where they weren't going to have access to that £1 million that their spouse would have had. It now means that they will be able to access that. So it's a change which is welcome. It's also recognition that the policy isn't correct, which again we've been pushing for over a year now.
The government has argued consistently since last year's budget that this is a fair tax and that it will go ahead. Is it time to accept that and move on, as the Farming Minister Angela Eagle put it on this programme last week?
We cannot move on, Charlotte, while there is that sector of our community that don't have any ability to plan because they don't expect to live for very long beyond April next year. While they are still trapped within this policy, we are absolutely focused now on how we can amend the finance bill to try and mitigate the impact on those that are trapped within this pernicious tax. And that is what we'll be doing over the next few weeks.
I just want to move on to some of the other things that were mentioned. Increase in the national minimum wage and indeed the living wage, free apprenticeships for the under 25s. Both of those will have an effect, won't they, on some farming businesses?
But the free apprenticeships one is actually good news. The agricultural industry should be very well placed to provide apprenticeships and to draw people in that maybe want to leave school at an earlier age. So that is something that we will welcome. On the national living wage, that is another inflationary pressure within our food system. And at the moment the government are desperate to try and mitigate food price inflation, well, that national living wage increasing 4.1% will drive inflation through the whole system, and that will end up coming through to the retail shelf because our members cannot absorb those cost increases. It must go up the supply chain.
The other thing she talked about was energy bills and some breaks for industry there, but she hasn't as yet responded to calls to include horticulture in that.
No, again, energy is one of those costs which is making us far less competitive. And we need to recognise that these high costs of energy are making us less efficient, are another contributory factor towards inflation. Particularly the horticultural sector, it's something that they have to look at urgently.
Tom Bradshaw from the National Farmers Union. And that's it from us. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Rebecca Rooney, and Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.